Today on this episode of The Brain Surgeon's Take, we will be discussing why every doctor needs social media with social media guru and influencer, as well as board-certified dermatologist, Dr. Luke Maxfield. Hear about the power of social media and how all medical professionals can amplify their reach through platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. In the era of technology, social media is no longer an option. It's mandatory. Much more on this podcast episode. Welcome back, everyone. Here's my take on Dr. Luke Maxfield. He is the perfect example of how a doctor should utilize social media. He has harnessed its power to maximize awareness, reach, and exposure. As an accomplished board-certified dermatologist, he is constantly educating the public with his healthcare advice and pearls of wisdom. Without social media, Luke would only be able to interact with his patients and local community. But through social media, he is able to impact the lives of patients across the globe. Newsflash: social media is here to stay at every single level. You either get on the technology train or you get run over. This interview reminded me of when I first got involved with Instagram several years ago. I was both reluctant and skeptical of how it would integrate into my practice. Fast forward to now, and social media is a major component of our brain tumor program and institute. It's an irreplaceable part of our group's outreach and patient access. For all the doubters out there, I can only say, take the jump. The sooner you adopt social media, the sooner your career will hit overdrive. Listen up as we discuss why every doctor needs social media. Check it out. Hey, Luke, how you doing?
I'm great. Couldn't be better.
Awesome, man. Listen, I'm excited to have you on the podcast to talk about why every doctor needs social media. You've been such a pioneer in the field and really an influencer, showing other physicians how to use social media to their advantage. I've been a big fan as well and look forward to hearing your advice and your views on this.
Well, I greatly appreciate that sentiment. I think, I don't know even where to start because it's such an interesting journey, I think, for a doctor to enter this space. And now there's probably a slight generational gap where those coming out of residency are so used to seeing doctors on social media, and programs are probably a little bit used to the dynamics of having their trainees or their faculty entering social media that's hopefully a little bit more welcoming of a space right now. But initially, it felt very uncomfortable. I think especially as doctors, we spent so much of our time in a professional setting. We're fairly guarded initially, and then we feel like we always have a lot to lose because there's always our medical license accuracy and just our whole professional persona that seems in the crosshairs, so to speak, at all times. That there's a little bit of vulnerability with social media where you open up parts of your personal life that you feel comfortable with. You speak to a group of people, a large group of people that you certainly don't know. And I think for me, because I was actually a very private person. I didn't have social media until YouTube. That was my introduction to the space. And thankfully I had a colleague, Dr. Shaw, who really showed me first the value of it. But for me, I feel like I got to get my toes in with a very welcoming audience, some familiarity. But I do believe it's extremely valuable for doctors to be on social media to address the general public.
So start with, I guess, your explanation, and you kind of alluded to it, but what is the power of social media? Explain what it can do for physicians.
I think the power is best exemplified of what non-physicians are able to do with it, because we have some amount of training pedigree that we feel like we have an authority on certain topics. However, we watch the world shift and opinions shift on medical subjects continuously, often at the whims of non-physicians or non-medical personnel. And so I think a doctor's impetus initially may even be just to speak what they feel to be true on a given medical topic to try to counterbalance some things out there that are powerful messages, but perhaps wrong. And then each doctor within their own specialty certainly has a lot of value to add to that space. in dermatology, we've just such an interesting transition for my profession over the last, it's only 2024, last 5 years. Our whole world has changed in terms of how we interact with the world. Because with skincare kind of becoming the new makeup, all of a sudden, skin was first and foremost on many people's minds. And through social media, we saw a lot of non professionals shaping how people were taking care of their skin. But then, even more than that simple messaging, we saw individuals shaping how people thought about medical conditions of their skin. And so, I think, especially early on, a lot of people on social media, dermatologists, realized that there was a significant need for our voice to be in the mix. And then thankfully, a lot of my colleagues have had a good amount of success where they've not only established trust, they have a good dynamic relationship, but then they're also providing a lot of value to people that they can either be empowered to take care of their skin at home, or sift through the additional information armed and equipped with more knowledge.
Now, take us through your journey, right? Because you've become a huge influencer in your sphere. Obviously, that has to start somewhere. And our listeners might say, well, I don't even have an Instagram account. How do I start? How do I get to that level? Take us through how you were from the very beginning up to the point where you are now.
So from me on the back end, I had been on a trajectory probably more towards traditional like academic medicine. I always had a love of learning, and that translated to a love of teaching. And also, to be quite frank, I had a very, very tight budget in residency. And I know everyone does, but I had family, I was married, had kids. And so I was doing a lot on the side in the academic space, trying to just earn extra money on top of residency and training. So I was tutoring medical students for both general step 1, step 2 boards as a dermatology resident. I was tutoring dermatology people. I was creating board review content for all of the different medical exams. I was passionate about publishing, and so I really had a lot of energy and vigor and a heart towards medicine. Um, one thing I didn't have, like I said, was social media. Now, my colleague, Dr. Shaw, who I think you've talked to before as well, he I don't know. There's just a quality about him. He's very gregarious, very personable, and it just shows. And so it seemed natural when TikTok started becoming a thing. He gravitated towards that and found a lot of traction there. And interestingly, we had kind of parallel paths. We both switched specialties early into dermatology, although I was my initial track. But we were both doing all of these academic medical education things behind the scenes, even initially unknown to each other. We just had similar desires. And so when he saw the space and the need in social media, he said, Luke, we have to create a YouTube channel together. Like there's just such a void there. We could really, truly bring value to so many people and make an impact for a lot of people. And so over a period of 6 months, he dragged me in as I slowly got comfortable with the idea. And it didn't take long actually before we really kind of broke out in that space. And on YouTube, which again was my first platform, was really how I got comfortable with it. But really quickly, we actually, if you look back at our oldest videos, you'll see our two sides, because if our earliest videos were actually two content pieces. One was about medical education. We were actually talking about how to study for boards, our professional journey, and the other one was skincare. And the skincare one was more widely adopted, and so that's what we ended up focusing on. And we found that for me, I realized that this skincare story that everyone kind of takes part in throughout their lives, it's kind of some sort of concession to common ground, where it's something that I, as a human and individual, relate with, deal with, and the majority of people out there also relate and meet with this. And so not only is this common ground where we can talk about things that most people are familiar with, but it's also our ability to spread more medically prone messages about psoriasis or skin cancer awareness. So much of what we do as dermatologists, I feel, is like secondary prevention. And our being on social media is hopefully keeping people out of my Mohs surgery office. Like if I can say something that keeps you out of my surgical chair 10 years, 20 years down the road, I've just won. If I put myself out of business by preventing you from getting a skin cancer, perfect. Like that's the dream.
That's awesome. That's so great to hear. And I think people need to understand that what you just said, it's the fact you can reach millions of people as opposed to teaching at a medical center where you're reaching dozens or hundreds. And so I think the power of what you just said is the magnitude of the impact that you can have as a doctor. And I think that you are relatively limited if you're just taking care of your patients, which is great. I mean, that's why we went into medicine, is to take care of our patients. But imagine if you can do that 100-fold and really impact people's knowledge base, which is what you're doing. What do you say to all the doubters out there? And like you said, there's this generational gap, and I've seen it. It still exists. I'm sure you see it all the time. What do you say to the doubters or the naysayers who fight the natural evolution of social media in their career?
I would actually say I was right there with you. If you are someone who looks at me in a negative light and you're a colleague, like I actually probably could understand where you're coming from. And I'm sure there's something about what you would have to say that I would resonate with for multiple reasons. One of which, I was a fairly private person. I was uncomfortable stepping into this space until I felt comfortable over time. But I think the second thing is, like you mentioned, is the natural progression and evolution. One thing that I think as doctors that can be extremely disheartening is the fact that through technology, knowledge has almost become a commodity. And that's the thing we probably cherish and take the most pride in, because we've invested decades of our best years into the pursuit of knowledge. And it's much more accessible now than ever. However, just probably like what ChatGPT tries to do in synthesizing data, we end up being that filter, especially as doctors. We take everything our patients have to say. Okay, for those of you not watching the podcast, by the way, Rick just took a drink of a telescopic picture of him taking a drink into a telescopic picture of him taking a drink. That is amazing. That was the best moment I think I've seen on camera in a long time.
That's an idea for your next YouTube video, man. I need some royalties. Let's just peep that again. You
Oh
just
my
peep that again.
gosh.
Take a look, dude.
My
All
mind is
right.
blown. um, so anyway, we need to act as that filter. So not only within what we're familiar with in professional textbooks, medical journals, but by us being on social media, we actually synthesize, incorporate common topics. We actually finally, I feel like finally can get a pulse on what the social waves are before it reaches us 10 years down the road in our academic centers. And then through social media and our own platforms, we can synthesize that, add the nuance that is absolutely necessary and missing from almost all short form content, and then help again empower people to have the knowledge base to make their own decisions. Because that's probably the thing I'm most passionate about, is just making sure people are educated so they can take care of themselves in a meaningful and accurate way with good information.
And I would even go further and I would say, if we as doctors, or really any expert in any field, whether it's law or business or what have you, if we don't get on social media, every idiot has a platform. And so every moron out there with no background, no education, no expertise can go on Instagram and say, hey, look, this is how you take care of your skin. I rub gasoline on it and it's great and it works really good. And they have a platform. And so I think it's our responsibility as professionals, as doctors. I think we have to dominate that space so that the information people get is accurate and it comes from people who are knowledgeable and have experience. Um, would you also say that, looking at the trend, that with its incredible growth, social media will be the number one marketing tool for any profession?
I think we're already there. Again, I think there probably is a generational split, but having worked and working with the heavily with the marketing side, I think the majority of the world, especially who target younger individuals, I mean, that's it. Like, information is consumed through TikTok and YouTube. Like, if you want to learn how to fix your car, where are you going to go? YouTube. If you are younger than an arbitrary age, which I'll just forgo naming, then you're going to TikTok. But like, it's very rare. And I love libraries. I utilize public libraries probably more than anybody I know. I'm there all the time, but it's very rare for people actually to go hunt down a paper book, or even just straight up look at Google instructions. There's just so much accessibility to information. That's how people are learning. That's how people are consuming information. And because that's where the people are, that's where almost all advertising is going as well.
Let's talk to some of the tangible advice to people maybe who are new to the field of social media. They look, there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's TikTok, like you mentioned, so many options. How are these platforms different, and how should someone pick what platform to really focus on?
So the interesting thing is, so let's break it down, I think, to what the big three are, in my opinion. And that's YouTube, Instagram and Meta, that whole world, and then TikTok. And those are the three I think most people should focus on in terms of investment of time, because that's where the majority of people are consuming information and watching content. Now, before you even get to that point, though, I think a person does need to have some introspection, especially as a doctor. Like, what is it you're trying to convey? Like, who you are as a person is going to shine through. Like, I can't help a little bit of silliness, fun, and casual nature to come out, because that's just who I am. Like, that just shows itself. So you don't have to worry about you coming through if you get comfortable. But you do have to be thoughtful and deliberate, which is probably my favorite word, in terms of how you are going to present the information and what you are going to say. But then the third part also is there's actually kind of a lot of responsibility that we may not be aware of as doctors, because in addition to all the textbooks we read, the studies, and the professional anecdote that we develop over years, there is a certain amount of time you really are going to have to invest. Like, it's work. Like, it's a ton of work. I have easily 300 to 400 pages of summarized studies with links and references for my personal genre, so to speak. Because when I speak, I am a doctor and I'm on social media. And in my opinion, you need to be ready to back that up. So I see a lot of doctors entering the space where, even though we have a wealth of and depth of knowledge on the human body, from physiology to how it corporates on a cellular level to how it's treated to, again, the whole system, we may miss the nuance. So you really have to be prepared to take on a whole nother level of work to fill in the gaps, to bridge the communication gap with the general public, and to keep on top of trending technology and conversations.
And you just said it really takes a lot of time. And I would agree with you. If you're going to enter that space, you have to allocate a certain amount of time. But obviously, everyone's time's limited, yours, mine, anyone who's busy. Is it better to focus on one, let's just say YouTube, or let's say it's TikTok, or is it better to do all to a lesser extent?
Hmm. I think so. TikTok and Instagram go hand in hand, because the video styles can be similar. Most people cross post their content. So if you do one, you should be doing the other. The interesting thing is, as um, the content can be similar, or at least the conversations can be similar, the audiences are different. The comments are very different. The personalities on each are very different. So you'll notice a bit of a split, even if your messaging is the same. And then there are specifics to each. So I would lump that into one category, and I would lump it as short form. So when I think of short form content, what you were trying to do is be extremely concise without being woefully incomplete. So for us, like doctors, the hardest thing we can do is not talk about a topic for an hour. We could talk about anything in the human. I could talk about kidneys for an hour. I haven't looked at a kidney book in 5-10 years, but I could talk with a significant depth on that topic because I'm still intimately knowledgeable about it. But the hardest thing, I think, for our community, how do you talk about a kidney in 10 seconds? How do you talk about a kidney in 15 seconds without leaving out those nuanced pieces that we know to be critical, that we would certainly put into a lecture? And so that's the hardest part, is speaking about a topic, figuring out how to convey a message without leaving out the critical parts. And that's short form. Like, just don't be woefully absent if something needs a caveat. The second part is long form, and that's YouTube. I personally have the deepest passion for long form because I can provide the context. I can give nuance that I feel is necessary and valuable, but still, you have to be concise. You have to balance not going way down a rabbit trail into what we would typically do in our minds whenever we think of any medical condition. But I personally think for anyone who's starting, YouTube is going to be very difficult to get traction on. That's absolutely the hardest platform to really garner much attention. But I do like YouTube, and I think it complements short form well. So I would say do one short form, one long form. If you decide to do a podcast, perfect. It's great. It's actually relatively straightforward, a lot less editing, a lot less technology work, I think, that you have to be familiar with. But you should couple long form with short form, in my opinion, because your wealth of knowledge needs to exist somewhere. So if I do a video on, let's say, wrinkles, something simple, wrinkles, I put on a short form. I say, hey, tretinoin, it's great for the wrinkles. It's great for your skin. So is exfoliating. So is sunscreen. Great. That's 15 seconds. But for those who are critical of something you say on short form, or for those who want to know more, I personally believe that you should create some sort of library of long form content, because that again gives people the education and information they need to make those critical decisions. You're never going to be able to make a critical, thoughtful decision based off of short form content alone. So long form really supplements that tremendously.
Yeah, it's like you have the Cliff Notes version with the short form if they just want to get information quickly, just the most important topics. But if they really want to get in depth and know the background and the physiology and what have you, then there's the long form content, which is on YouTube. Everyone's trying to make an impact in social media. Obviously, it's a massive, massive market. What would you say is the single best way to increase your social media following? Is it is it just being consistent, right? Is it posting every day? Is it posting once a week? Is it the content? How what is the single best way to really make a splash in this field?
I'd say consistency and being comfortable. And in part, they probably go hand in hand, because the more comfortable you are, the more consistent you are, the more comfortable you'll be, and the more you are going to shine through. So if you actually truly have a message and a voice, and you can communicate it well, and you're consistent, I do believe it's going to take care of itself, because there are going to people like there are going to be probably half the world who doesn't resonate with you and half the world that does. If you're lucky, you get that kind of split. But you are going to find that people are going to gravitate towards you. You're going to create an audience that does appreciate your message and how you are sharing your message. And over time, it will grow. But consistency is key. I mean, for us, we struggle with consistency on YouTube. It is a lot of effort. And so we put up a video probably once every other week, hopefully once a week, hopefully more than that in the future. But we've been saying that for years. Short form, the more you get comfortable, the more frequent you can post. A lot of people, even working doctors, post every single day. Some post twice a day. And that blows my mind. And they have families, and they're exercising, and they're performing at a high level professionally. Like, those people blow my mind. But there is something to posting every day on short form that I think works well for people. Long form, less frequently, is acceptable.
So you talk about budgeting time. You just mentioned kind of the ability to do it all. How much time do you budget? Give us your kind of day to day, week to week budgeting for social media.
So it is a little bit dynamic, because for everyone out there, when you're starting, social media is going to be 100% your extra time. Like, you will not probably reasonably be able to create too much time for it, sacrificing other things. So you have to squeeze it in. Wake up earlier, go to bed later, sacrifice a hobby, which is hard for me because I'm kind of a hobbyist. But so right now, and really my routine for the last few years has been wake up at 4, work on videos like during the work week. Let's say wake up at 4, work on videos between 4 to 5 a.m., exercise from 5 to 6, do school with the kids from 6 to 6:30, head to the office, get home from the office, spend time with the kids, put them down, spend time with the wife. And then, like, let's say I work 4 days a week, then Friday, that day is dedicated to filming. Saturday, that day is dedicated to filming, maybe a little editing. Sunday, my time is my time and my family's time, right? So for me, I'm very regimented, and that's the only way I could make it work. Having a family kind of forces you to do that. Um, but really, I just had to create time. I had to sleep less. I don't. I actually sometimes I wonder where the time comes from myself. But there's this phrase, is if, and I'm not going to say it right because I've only heard it once. But basically, if you want something done, you give it to the busiest person. You don't give it to someone who has nothing going on. But I feel like there is a point where you become hyper efficient with your time, for better or worse. And to fit something like this in the beginning, it's going to take a lot of planning to make it work.
I really couldn't agree more. I agree with you. And the statement is, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. You said it exactly right. And I would tell people that when they ask, where do you find the time to do social media or what have you, I say, if something is important to you, you'll find time, right? Like, you don't not have time to brush your teeth. Like, you make time to brush your teeth. And if something is important for you, like working out or social media, you end up making time. And if it's not important to you, then you're not going to be able to find time. So I completely echo what you said. I think being organized and disciplined and regimented, if you're going to be in all those different facets of life, you have to be regimented, right? You can't be like going to bed later than you want or getting up later than you want. Like you have to follow a certain schedule and be regimented. And kudos to you for being able to manage all of those different spheres in life. Explain why it's so important to have consistency in social media, meaning you can't take weeks off or even really days off where you're talking about short content. Like, why is it important to be consistent?
I, that's a great question. And it seems to just work well for people when they do it. So I can't tell you clearly whether it's like, is it the algorithm? If you post every day, are you going to get like 1 million views on day 10? I don't think it works like that. I would wager that it has more to do with human beings and habits, to where if you post consistently, you're when everyone wakes up, they open their phone. That's definitely a bad habit, but most everybody does it. And most people probably start scrolling. And if you're posting every day, you're always going to show up on people's feeds. If you have something new, it's always going to show up. And people get into the habit, I think, of what we call consuming your content. And I think that's probably the most practical reason you do well. I mean, there's also the other side of it. The more you do something, the more honed your craft becomes, and you probably get better with it over time. That's a second part, but I think also a part of it is like habitual training of everyone around you to expect you to have stuff out. And then there may be an algorithm component out there. Who knows? I have no idea about that.
How do you get the most bang for your buck? Hashtags, account tags, reposts. Let's talk Instagram, right? Everyone, I've seen people who have a million hashtags. That's super annoying. Or they or they tag like a million people, or they repost other people's stuff. Talk about hashtags, tagging people, and reposts. Like, what? I mean, do those work? Is there a bang for your buck?
So I think, and from what I understand, hashtags are all but dead. I don't believe they provide much, if any, value. I still do it because why not? But I don't think that adds a ton of value. The trending things, I actually don't sometimes. So I'm the type of person, if I see something 5 times, I'm probably tired of it. And so by the time I see a trend, I'm already probably tired of it. So I don't do a lot of trending things, but that does well for a lot of people, especially in my professional sphere. Like there, I don't know, the consumers of social media like the idea of seeing 10 different takes on the same thing. That still holds true. So I think trending, not necessarily songs, I think those actually don't do well, but the trending sounds, where it's like you repurposing the same information with a different take and a new sound. That does particularly well on all short form platforms. Reposting does well where you are reacting to someone else. The nice thing about that, honestly, though, for us as doctors, we will probably always have something to say with a repost, where we're duetting someone or stitching someone, because we should be able to provide value on top of the initial message. I would also say I'm kind of a positive person, so I do like to cultivate a culture of grace. And so when we're being doctors, like, the other person on the other spectrum, just try to read into their intent. Hopefully it's not malicious if they're spreading wrong information. And so I think treating that with a little bit of respect and grace is always a good thing. I think most of us do a really good job of that, but that's just me. Because if you harbor and create negativity, I think it just does come back around to you. But otherwise, I think you do have to be aware of what your voice is. So some people, they don't do much of anything specific. They just talk, but they're good storytellers. And so again, part of this you have to take the time to look at yourself, see how different things are going, see how the community responds to each type of different content, and then lean into whatever fits naturally with your voice.
What would you say? How do posts go viral? Right, you've had multiple different contents go viral. It's not all of them, but you definitely have had many. What would you say makes a post go viral?
Uh, that's a good question, because I was actually just texting another one of my colleagues, Dr. Casal, this morning, because I have one now. I'm just watching for fun because the numbers are going up quite quickly, and I don't know because I think if you look on your feed, people are like, oh, it's the likes, it's the shares, it's the comments, it's the rewatch, it's whatever. Who knows? On my videos, like the one that's going now, it's just like not that many comments, not that many shares, but the numbers are rapidly climbing. Sometimes it's 1 million shares. Sometimes it's 1 million comments. Like, I'm using fake numbers. It's not 1 million, but it's a lot. Sometimes that seems to be the weight that carries it forward. But sometimes I don't know there's an objective metric to capture virality. Actually, I think that's a big pitfall people presume. And it often, when you create content that way, like, oh, I need you to like this video. I need you to share this video. I think when you create the video, your intent can be too clear and too on the nose, and it takes away from whatever the true messaging is and the important thing that you're trying to say is in the video. I think if your message is actually particularly important, or you have said it in a way that for some reason just resonates with people, that will take care of itself as well. So I don't think you should chase likes. I don't think you should chase shares. I think that'll just cannibalize your intent. And I think brands especially have done that on TikTok, where they have tried to just hope and pray that the people they pay to create a sponsored video goes viral, as opposed to creating a depth of concept, or a depth of campaign or something to try to create a robust performance overall, instead of just like hoping, crossing your fingers, I hope this goes viral, I hope people watch this video and buy my product.
That's well said. Controversial question. What are your thoughts on Twitter since the Musk takeover?
uh it's interesting to watch. I noticed you still call it Twitter, just like Googling is always Googling, even if they change their names. I don't
Hmm.
know. I guess I don't have a strong take on that one. I also don't have a Twitter account, so I'm not closely following how those conversations have shifted. I never have had one. Still don't really have a desire to get on one because I hear it's kind of a hostile place to be. Um, yeah, I don't know. Let's see, watch it, see where it goes.
Exactly. It's more entertaining than anything else. It's like watching a soap opera. Um, so in summary, because we got to wrap up, I know you're super busy. What are your top 3 tips for any doctor listening to this podcast who's trying to amp up their social media game?
Um, I would say be yourself. I know it sounds corny as can be, but I think every person has some inherent value and some inherent unique qualities that will resonate with someone else out there that they may not get from someone else. So I think be comfortable with yourself. Through that, listen to or be aware of what you want your message to be. So 2 is intentional, be about your messaging and like what you want to put out there. And then I guess the third thing would probably be consistency. Like time and time again, that ends up being what pays off. And it could be years down the road. I see a lot of people who have been in the social media game longer than I have, years longer, and then now they're blowing up. Like they put in a ton of sweat equity, and I have nothing but positive and congratulatory feelings for them because they put in the work, and it was years before they saw a return on it. So those would probably be my 3 tenets.
Luke, great podcast. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I can only emphasize for our listeners, I think that anyone entering the space, especially as a doctor early on, there is trepidation. You had it. I definitely had it. I was considering going in it for a while. I'm like, no, that's so unprofessional. It's not really what a doctor should do. And just like you said, I can only tell anyone that this is the future. Take the jump. It's well worth it. And if not, you're basically going to miss the boat. Like, this is the way media and marketing and really education, like you said, moving forward. It's not about, if you want to forget the marketing piece as a doctor, focus on the educational piece, which is definitely important to all of us. And you got to take that jump. And the sooner you do the jump, the more your career is going to be pushed ahead. And I think you really highlighted that.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think there's tremendous value in it. I mean, I actually see a lot of people every week who are just extremely thankful and voice their gratitude for, even at the airport. Like they take the time to stop me just to say thanks. And so I know in my heart how valuable this is to a lot of people out there. And then you, especially in your specialty, other specialties as well, like think of what you have to offer. If you're a doctor out there who is saving lives on a regular basis, you have something valuable to say tremendously. You have a tremendous wealth. And I just encourage you to kind of share that with the people around you.
Yeah, and now you know what you need to do for your next post, buddy. All right, this is what you gotta. This is the way you're gonna have to amp up your social media game. I'm glad I gave you at least one idea.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The mug is legendary.
All right, buddy, man. Listen, thanks for joining us. Have an awesome weekend.
Awesome. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you tremendously.
Always.